All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at a pretty fascinating article that uses the tools of clinical psychology to analyze a major political figure. The source is The Science Behind Donald Trump's Dangerous Personality Disorder, written by Dr. Vince Greenwood, a clinical psychologist. So let's break down his analysis. So the author kicks things off by pointing out something we've all probably noticed. Donald Trump has this unique, riveting, and often defiant public personality. It absolutely captivates people, whether you're a supporter or a detractor. As the author puts it, he kind of operates in a world of his own making. But here is the absolute core of the entire article. Dr. Greenwood's main argument is that what we're seeing might not be a one-of-a-kind personality at all. Instead, he suggests it could be a classic, even garden variety, example of a very specific psychiatric condition, one that makes a person's behavior highly predictable.
Okay, so for us to really get what the author is arguing, we first have to understand the tool he's using to build his case. He claims this analysis isn't just his opinion, it's based on a specific diagnostic instrument that has a pretty long history.
You know, the idea of a person who seems perfectly rational but just lacks a moral compass, according to the source, that's not a new idea at all. It's been documented for centuries. But our scientific understanding really took a huge leap forward in the 20th century. First, with this foundational book, The Mask of Sanity, and then, crucially, when Dr. Robert Hare developed a standardized checklist. And this is the tool at the heart of the whole analysis, the Hare Psychopathy Checklist. The author is very clear that in his field, it's considered the absolute gold standard for diagnosing clinical psychopathy. It's what turns observations into measurable data. And this checklist is the entire foundation for his argument. Now, what's really interesting here is the rigor the author claims is required to even use this thing. It's not some simple quiz you take online. No, it demands a massive amount of validated life history data, focusing on lifelong patterns of actual, observable behavior, not just the big headline-grabbing moments. This is the elephant in the room, isn't it? The author tackles it head-on. His answer is a firm yes, but with a huge caveat. Only if there's enough public data. He argues that in the case of Donald Trump, the sheer volume of biographies, interviews, and sworn testimony provides more than enough information to apply the checklist, even without a face-to-face interview. So, with all that groundwork laid, let's get to the author's findings. What actually happens when he takes the 20 items on the Hare checklist and applies them to all that available data? The author's final score is 33. So how it works is, the checklist has 20 items, and each one gets a score of 0, 1, or 2. The highest possible score is 40. Dr. Greenwood's analysis lands at a 33. But what does a 33 really mean? This chart puts it into some pretty stark context. The average score for you or me, the general population, is just 4. The average for inmates in a maximum security prison? That's 22. The clinical cutoff for an actual diagnosis of psychopathy is 30. So the author's score of 33 puts the subject well over that clinical threshold. According to the article, thousands of studies using this checklist have let researchers basically distill the condition down to its essence. They've identified 3 core, governing clusters of traits that, he argues, explain pretty much all the behavior. Let's take a look at each one. The first one is impulsivity. The author defines this as being kind of hardwired to only see the world through a what's in it for me, right now, lens. He says it makes things like long-term planning or thinking about future consequences almost impossible. Trait number 2 is remorselessness. Now, this is what the author notes most people think of when they hear the term. It's described as a fundamental inability to feel things like shame, guilt, or empathy. It's like the internal brakes that stop most people from causing harm just aren't there. And the third trait is a constant drive to dominate. The author argues that since those other humanizing emotions are absent, the main way of engaging with the world becomes this one-dimensional game of winning at all costs, using manipulation and aggression to always stay on top. So the really crucial point here is how these 3 traits supposedly work together. To prove his point, the author applies this model to 2 major historical events to argue they provide a really clear explanation. First up, the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Greenwood connects specific, documented actions directly to his 3-trait model. For instance, he attributes downplaying the virus's severity to remorselessness, an inability to feel concern for what might happen to others. Refusing to work with health officials, he links that to the drive to dominate. And getting bored with complex briefings, he explains that as impulsivity.
The second case study in the article covers that whole period from the 2020 election through the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Let's see how the author applies the model here.
And again, the author maps what he calls observed behaviors to those core traits. The inability to ever accept defeat, he frames that as a function of the drive to dominate. The chaotic, disorganized nature of the whole effort, he attributes that to impulsivity. And attacking democratic norms without a second thought, he chalks that up to remorselessness.
And to back up his point about impulsivity leading to this disorganization, the author pulls this quote from Michael Wolff's book, Landslide. It describes a situation where there were a lot of desires and demands, but just no capacity for the actual planning you'd need to pull off a complex goal.
So where does this all lead? Well, the author wraps everything up by saying he feels a professional duty to warn the public, based on what this diagnosis implies for future behavior.
The absolute core of his warning is this. He argues these traits are not choices, they're hardwired, and they are unchangeable. And, according to him, if the traits are permanent, then the behaviors that come from them become highly, highly predictable.
And this slide lays out those specific predictions. The author projects that because of these three core traits, a specific set of behaviors is almost guaranteed. Things like acting without foresight, demanding absolute loyalty, and ignoring norms without any fear of the consequences.
And here is the author's final, pretty stark message. He claims the real danger is that for most of us, people who operate with empathy and a conscience, it's just really difficult to truly comprehend a mindset that doesn't have those things. And because of that, we underestimate the potential actions of someone who's playing by a completely different internal rulebook.
And that's the author's analysis, a case built entirely on a specific clinical framework. It leaves us with a really critical question to think about. What is the proper role for this kind of psychological analysis in the public square when we evaluate our leaders?